please welcome President of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, Kerry Kennedy.
Thanks.
Kerry, welcome to our sanctuary, welcome to CNBC, and thank you so much for joining me here today.
Great to be here, thanks.
How has this year's Davos been for you, and what is the message that you would like to give to the leaders here?
Well, it's been warmer and easier to walk around. I think that, people are talking a lot about Ukraine. They're talking a lot about the economy and inflation and what that will do. There's not enough discussion about diversity and inclusion. There's not enough discussion about the S and ESG. A lot about global warming and the technological revolution. I think, we face tremendous challenges as a world, and we're doing all this in the context of deciding between democracy and autocracy. And I think if we go the autocracy route, we lose on everything, on technology, on global warming, on anti-poverty programs. If we go with democracy, we've got a shot. And I think that's what's happened with the war in Ukraine, is there's been a reawakening of the importance of democracy.
Well, of course, Kerry, the war in Ukraine has created a huge humanitarian crisis. How concerned are you? And of course, how it affects democracy as well?
Well, I happened to be in Poland just a few weeks ago, meeting with refugees, with families, with Polish people who had brought refugees into their homes, and with political leaders. I mean, it's just absolutely heartbreaking to see what people have been through. The hell that they've had to leave their husbands, their fathers, their sons behind. And then to see their country be decimated by an autocratic ruler next door, for no reason at all. It's heartening to see, especially what the Polish people have done, bringing over 1 million refugees into their homes. I think Europe needs to give more. It's given so much, but it needs to give more to humanitarian aid, and then not forget about Ukraine when we have to rebuild.
What do you make of the global response so far?
Well, I think it's amazing how Europe has pulled together, and I have to say that I think we're really lucky that Joe Biden was president at this particular moment. I can't imagine what a disaster it would be if Trump had won.
Why do you say that, Kerry?
Well, because I think that Biden really played an important role in bringing Europe together. And I think that Trump was so embedded with Putin that the response would really have been terrifying.
But what response do you think would have happened? Because people are talking, saying, well, if they'd had a closer relationship, Trump and Putin, then maybe it wouldn't have happened.
Oh, I don't think that's true. I think that Putin was pretty determined to do what he was going to do. I think that it just would have been hard to get the unified response from Europe without Biden's leadership. But I think that we need to ask more questions, less questions about how do we win this war, and more questions about how do we win peace, because that's really the goal here. And there's a lot of talk about sending more weapons and very, very little talk about how to get the peace.
And how do you feel that can be achieved, Kerry, in this current climate?
Well, I think we need to, first of all, start discussing it more at a high level. And I think that there needs to be more pressure put on both sides to come to the table and have serious peace talks.
We seem to be at a pivotal point. We're seeing shrinking post-pandemic budgets. The cost of living keeps rising. And of course, the conflicts that we've just been talking about. Many are worried about social unrest. How concerned are you?
Well, I think that people feel like there's a social contract, and that their governments are not meeting that social contract. And that social contract said that if you get a job, we'll give you a job for the rest of your life. You'll be able to go on vacation. You'll have a house that you own and you can pass on to your children. You'll have health care. You'll be in a union, which will be strong and guarantee you certain rights and privileges. And all of that's been taken away. And I think that people are angry and they feel that the political class is not hearing them. And they don't really believe in democracy necessarily. Or they don't have faith in political leaders to make that democracy work. And so I think there's a lot of anger and a lot of frustration and a lot of impetus to blow up the system. And if that means turning towards autocracies, that's the way they'll go. And so I think it's a very dangerous moment. But I think it's also a moment of tremendous change. And that if we follow through on the promises for diversity and inclusion, if we follow through on the promises for the protecting the S and ESG, that there's a way forward.
How much responsibility should corporations have in creating a more equitable world?
I think that it's up to the corporations to do that. The massive wealth has come from corporations and that Milton Friedman, belief in profit rules. And that's been shown to be a disaster for our world, for our planet, for our people. I think there's a lot more demand of corporate leaders now to be engaged in the community and to be good corporate actors. We need Wall Street to be more cognizant that social business, that businesses have a commitment to their employees to be fair, to ensure that everybody up and down the supply chain is treated with respect and dignity. But I'd like to say something more about diversity and inclusion, because I think there's this sense that for diversity and inclusion, all you need is to put a person of color or woman into a position, but that's really not enough. What we want is the full value of having diverse people within our organizations to listen and to change our organizations based on their vision and their experiences. So that's really the deeper step of diversity and inclusion, and that is a step that I think very few have really thought about the implications of.
And what are the implications, Kerry, if they don't do that?
Well, I think we get the same old, same old. So I'll give you an example. If you are going to have an operation and you're in a place, let's say New York, where you have a wide range of hospitals, and you want to make sure that they're not going to leave the scalpel and then sew you up. So you say to each of the hospitals, what percentage of the time do you make a mistake? There's 2%, 5%, 10%, 20%, 30%. Which hospital do you go to?
Yeah.
Well, which one would you go to?
You go to the one.
The 2%, right?
Exactly.
But that's the wrong answer.
Yes.
You want to go to the 20% because people make mistakes 20% of the time. If you go to the 2%, you're going to a system where people will not, where the bosses will not tolerate mistakes. So people lie. They don't tell the truth about what the problems are. And so then if you take a doctor or nurse from a 20% hospital and put them into a 2% hospital, they start lying.
Yeah.
They start being part of that culture. So when we have diversity and inclusion, we don't want to have the same old white male culture. We need to change that culture and make all of our...
Is it changing, though? Do you feel it's going in the right direction?
Well, I think that so far there's a commitment to diversity and inclusion. We haven't seen enough of that go through yet. So for instance, we're here in Davos in the investment community, which controls all the investment money in the world, $70 trillion in investment dollars. What percent of that is controlled by women and underrepresented minority-owned firms? What percent? Less than 2%. I mean, until we address that structural issue, forget about it. We're never going to solve global warming. We're never going to empower women. We're never going to address poverty and pandemics, because you have the same structures in place and the same people in place doing the same thing. We need to diversify.
Surely this is the place, though, to take action. You have the audience here.
Well, yes, exactly. That's why I'm talking to you and talking about this and
but
talking
here
to
at the
others.
forum, though, in terms of industry leaders, this is the place where they can take action. Are they going to do that?
Exactly. Well, it's coming to Davos, you always leave very hopeful because you're in all these meetings with people with tremendous amounts of resources and power making extraordinary promises. I have to say that Hans Vestberg, who's the head of the CEO of Verizon, I was at an event with him yesterday, and he said we're going to get 1 billion people online in the next 5 years. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary moment to see what a transformative program that is, really, and how that will change the world. So you leave here sort of thinking, okay, there's a way forward.
And inspired, you feel that something can happen.
Yes, exactly.
Kerry, of course, you're the president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, which was established over 50 years ago. In your time there, do you think human rights have actually worsened?
No, I think they've gotten better. When I started, you talk about what gives you hope. When I started working in human rights in 1981, all of Latin America was under right-wing military dictatorships. Eastern Europe was ruled by communism. South Africa was at the height of apartheid. Women's rights was not on the international agenda. None of that is true. All of those have changed and changed towards freedom. And the impetus for that freedom, the reason for it, is not because militaries or governments or huge multinational corporations wanted them to. Multinationals and militaries and governments tried to stop those changes. They all happened because of small groups of determined people harnessed the dream of freedom and made it come true. And they got together with their neighbors and their friends, and they grew and they grew and they grew, and they demanded that change. And that's the source that's always been the greatest source of freedom. It's been the greatest source of human rights, and it continues to be that today. And that's where I get my greatest hope.
Of course, the organization was named after your late father. Do you feel a responsibility to continue his work?
You know, I think responsibility feels like such a burden. And I don't feel a burden to do it because I feel like I'm just so blessed every day to do the work that I do. And that's been my way my whole life. When I learned to tie my shoes, I made sure if I put the left one on first, I tied the right one first because I didn't want there to be discrimination. So this has been sort of a value set of mine my entire life. And I feel like I'm working with the Martin Luther Kings and Mahatma Gandhis and Wangari Maathais of their countries. So I feel like I'm really working with superheroes and inspired by them every day.
And of course, you come from one of the most famous political dynasties. Have you ever been tempted to go into politics?
Well, every Kennedy thinks about going into politics, but there's over 100 of us right at the moment, so we're not all doing that. There was a time when there was a seat open in Boston that I seriously considered, but my heart has really always been engaged in international human rights, and this is my calling, and this is what I've always wanted to do, and I'm lucky enough to be able to do it.
What are your hopes for the future, Kerry? What sort of world do you want your daughters to inherit?
Well, it's interesting. As I was saying, people come to the table with a priority. I'm going to work on women's rights, or I'm going to work on the environment, or I'm going to change corporate culture. I think none of those things change unless all of that changes. So I think that we all have to work together. Everybody who is trying to create change, whether at the corporate level or the grassroots level, or across the board. Whether you're trying to change your church, we're sitting here in this beautiful chapel, or you're trying to change your classroom. We all need to work together to create the type of world we'll see. And imagine this world. It's going to be a world where you breathe free air because there's not going to be pollution, where we have to imagine what it's going to be like, where there's fairness, where everybody really has a shot based on merit, where everybody can read and write and do arithmetic and use their brains and create their art and know that they're going to be taken care of. It's going to be a beautiful world, but we're going to have to work to get there.
Kerry Kennedy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.